She married her own stepson. Sinatra shattered his family for Ava. Elizabeth stole Debbie's husband. These are 17 stars. 17 absolute detonations that turned Hollywood love into front-page scandal. Gloria Graham, the femme fatale, who fell for her stepson. In the dim glow of Hollywood's noir era, Gloria Graham made a living playing women you couldn't quite trust. Sultry, calculating, dangerous. But no one expected her most scandalous role would unfold off-screen. In her own living room, by the early 1950s, Graham had carved out a reputation as one of the industry's most magnetic supporting actresses. She won an Oscar. She worked alongside Humphrey Bogart and Jimmy Stewart. And yet, behind closed doors, her personal life was spiraling toward one of the most jaw-dropping scandals in Hollywood history. It started with her second husband, director Nicholas Ray, the man behind Rebel Without a Cause. They were a volatile pair, always drifting between passion and distance. But in 1950, Nicholas came home early one afternoon and allegedly found something that would haunt his legacy forever. According to reports whispered through studio hallways for years, Ray walked in on Graham in bed with his stepson, Anthony Ray. Gloria denied it. Nick never went public, but their marriage collapsed soon after. Whispers turned to rumors. Rumors became Hollywood poison. Studios looked the other way, but the damage was done. Graham's star dimmed. She married again, briefly, but it was what came next that cemented her legacy in the tabloids. In 1960, Gloria Graham, now 36, quietly married Anthony Ray, the same stepson she had once allegedly been caught with earlier. He was 23. They had 2 children together. And though they stayed married for over a decade, the marriage was widely viewed as a scandal the town couldn't digest. The revelation resurfaced every few years, blacklisting her from major roles. Directors grew wary. Talk show hosts avoided her. Her career never recovered the way it should have. In her final years, Graham retreated to small stages and quiet towns, avoiding the Hollywood glare she once commanded. She died in 1981 of cancer, away from the cameras, remembered more for the scandal than the talent. Gloria Graham played dangerous women, but off-screen, the danger was real. Her choices shattered reputations, ended careers, and left behind a story that still stuns. Not even the sharpest femme fatale could script a twist like this. Frank Sinatra, the voice that couldn't stay faithful. In 1949, Frank Sinatra's voice was on every radio, smooth as silk, aching with longing. But at home, the man behind the croon was unraveling, tangled in a love story that would stain his reputation and leave hearts broken coast to coast. Frank was still married to his first wife, Nancy Barbato, the quiet girl from Hoboken, who stood by him through obscurity, poverty, and war. They had 3 children together, and for a time, she believed in the dream they'd built. But fame does strange things to loyalty. And when Frank locked eyes with actress Ava Gardner at a swanky Hollywood party, something shifted. She wasn't just beautiful, she was intoxicating, bold, unreachable. And Frank, who could charm a nation, couldn't help himself. Their affair began in secret, whispered about behind velvet curtains and studio gates. He sent flowers to her dressing rooms. She called him Francis in private. Paparazzi tried to catch them. But it was the emotional fallout at home that couldn't be hidden. Nancy knew, the tabloids knew, the public knew, but Frank wouldn't stop. In 1951, he made it official, divorcing Nancy and marrying Ava just days later. But what seemed like a passionate victory soon crumbled into chaos. Frank couldn't stay faithful. Ava, fiery and proud, refused to be humiliated. Their fights were legendary, their silences louder than any song. She once threw his belongings out a window. He once begged her back with tears and a loaded revolver on the bed, a moment she would recount with both pity and distance. The marriage dissolved in 1957, leaving behind a storm of broken trust and bitter regret. Sinatra's career dipped His health suffered, and the studios hesitated to back him. For a time, even the music faltered. The man who sang of romance had lost his muse and much of himself. Years later, Ava called Frank the love of her life, but she never remarried, and he rarely spoke of her again. He could fill a stadium with his voice, but when it came to love, Frank Sinatra left silence in his wake. Elizabeth Taylor, the affair that shattered a friendship and lit up the tabloids. In 1958, America's sweetheart broke every rule in the book, not for a role, but for love. And in doing so, Elizabeth Taylor didn't just steal a man, she shattered one of Hollywood's most cherished friendships. At the time, Elizabeth was newly widowed. Her third husband, producer Mike Todd, had died in a tragic plane crash, and the world mourned with her. She was just 26, already a screen legend, and drowning in grief. Stepping in to console her was Eddie Fisher, one of the most popular crooners in America, and the husband of her best friend, Debbie Reynolds. What began as comfort turned quickly into passion. While Debbie stayed home caring for their young children, Eddie and Elizabeth grew inseparable. Dinners, phone calls, whispers behind dressing room doors. The press didn't need long to catch wind of it. Neither did Debbie. The revelation was as cruel as it was cinematic. Debbie reportedly called Elizabeth's hotel, hoping for a friend's voice on the line. But it was Eddie who answered. The silence said everything. Soon after, headlines exploded. America's golden couple was no more, and Elizabeth, once adored by millions, was now labeled a homewrecker. The fallout was immediate. Eddie divorced Debbie and married Elizabeth in 1959, just months after Mike Todd's death. Fans were stunned. Studio execs panicked. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was public. 2 stars ruined, 1 alliance lost, and a nation wondering how far fame could bend morality. And yet, Elizabeth and Eddie's union wouldn't last. Their marriage, born of grief and scandal, collapsed under its own weight. By 1964, she'd left him, this time for Richard Burton, igniting yet another legendary affair. Years later, Debbie and Elizabeth would reconcile. In a quiet act of grace, the 2 women found their way back to friendship, even sharing the stage in their later years. But the scars lingered, etched into gossip columns and fan memories. She was the violet-eyed goddess who could command a screen with a glance. But off-screen, Elizabeth Taylor paid dearly for love that arrived at the wrong time and with the wrong man. Jack Nicholson, the devil behind the grin. In 1990, Jack Nicholson walked into his Los Angeles home with a confession on his lips, and a secret that would blow his long-term relationship to pieces. For nearly 17 years, Jack had been with actress Anjelica Huston. She was Hollywood royalty, the daughter of legendary director John Huston, and a star in her own right. Their romance was unconventional but magnetic, a mixture of red carpets, private dinners, and long stretches apart. And through it all, Anjelica believed they were building something lasting until Jack told her he was expecting a child with another woman. The woman was Rebecca Broussard, a young model and actress 12 years Anjelica's junior. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was a revelation, one that swept the rug out from under a woman who'd invested nearly 2 decades into a man who could never seem to give her permanence. The emotional fallout was instant and brutal. Anjelica walked out of Jack's life that day, and she never looked back. Years later, she'd admit the betrayal felt like an arrow through the heart. There were no screaming matches, no tabloids catching a dramatic exit, just the quiet devastation of a woman blindsided by someone she still loved. Jack stayed with Rebecca for a time and welcomed 2 children with her. But like many of his relationships, that too eventually dissolved. He was the eternal bachelor, charming and brilliant, but incapable, it seemed, of lasting commitment. Friends would say he feared boredom more than loneliness. Others whispered he simply couldn't help himself. For Anjelica, the heartbreak never quite disappeared. She would later marry sculptor Robert Graham, a man far removed from the chaos of Hollywood. Their marriage was grounded, lasting until his passing in 2008. A quiet ending to a love that began in the rubble of betrayal. As for Jack, he once admitted in an interview that he regretted hurting Angelica more than anything else in his life. The grin remained, but behind it, perhaps, was the face of a man who had everything and still let the best thing slip through his fingers. In a town built on illusion, Jack Nicholson could play any part except the one that demanded loyalty. Barbara Payton, the blonde siren who loved too loudly. In 1951, Barbara Payton was the definition of Hollywood allure. Icy blonde hair, heavy-lidded eyes, and a presence that drew both the camera and trouble like a magnet. But behind the sultry image was a woman whose real-life drama soon eclipsed anything written in her scripts. Payton rose fast. With roles alongside Gary Cooper and James Cagney, her future seemed golden. But as quickly as she climbed, the fall began. Not in her talent, but in her choices. And one of those choices would trigger a scandal that burned her career to the ground. That year, she became entangled in a volatile love triangle between two actors. Franchot Tone, a refined leading man of the old guard, and Tom Neal, a hot-tempered former boxer turned the B-movie star. Payton was engaged to Tone, but couldn't stay away from Neal. The triangle spiraled into chaos, jealousy, threats, and finally, violence. On September 14, 1951, Tom Neal brutally beat Franchot Tone unconscious outside Payton's apartment. Tone suffered a smashed cheekbone, a broken nose, and a concussion. The story exploded. Headlines blared. Photos of Tone's battered face made the rounds. And Barbara, caught in the center, became tabloid poison. Still, she married Tone for 53 days. Then she left him and went back to Neal. Hollywood didn't forgive. Studios distanced themselves. Scripts stopped coming. And Barbara, once destined for stardom, found herself spiraling, turning to nightclub appearances, cheap tabloid deals, and eventually selling photos and favors just to survive. The money disappeared as fast as it came. By her late 30s, Payton was unrecognizable from the starlet who had once graced magazine covers. Her health declined, and so did her spirit. In 1967, at just 39 years old, Barbara Payton died broke, alone, and nearly forgotten in a seedy Los Angeles apartment. She wasn't destroyed by one man or one moment. She was consumed by a hunger for love that never came without a cost. Barbara Payton lived like a candle burning at both ends, and Hollywood, always watching, turned away just in time to avoid the smoke. Marilyn Monroe, the secret she took to her grave. On May 19, 1962, Marilyn Monroe stepped onto the stage of Madison Square Garden in a skin-tight, jewel-studded gown that shimmered like liquid light. Before a crowd of thousands and one sitting president, she whispered, "Happy birthday, Mr. President," and in doing so, turned a rumor into a scandal that would echo for decades. Behind her breathy delivery and radiant smile was a woman unraveling. By then, Marilyn had already weathered 3 failed marriages, battled to be taken seriously as an actress, and found herself ensnared in a tangle of powerful men who adored her on screen, but rarely stood by her off it. Chief among them, President John F. Kennedy and, allegedly, his brother Robert. Though the full truth was buried long ago, whispers of an affair between Marilyn and JFK had swirled through Hollywood and Washington alike. The pair were said to have met at a party hosted by Bing Crosby in Palm Springs. Eyewitnesses claimed there was more than just flirtation, and while neither Monroe nor Kennedy ever publicly confirmed the relationship, her sultry serenade, delivered just 10 weeks before her untimely death, cemented the speculation in the minds of millions. The deeper tragedy was not the affair itself, but the fallout it left behind. After her performance, Marilyn was reportedly frozen out of the president's circle, cut off, silenced, and left adrift. Friends described her as emotionally frayed, increasingly isolated, and desperate to be seen as more than a plaything of the powerful. In private, she confided in those closest to her that she felt discarded, like a secret too dangerous to keep, but too inconvenient to protect. Some believed she was preparing to go public. Others feared she knew too much. And then, just months later, she was gone. Found alone in her Brentwood home after what authorities called a fatal mix of sleeping pills. Officially, it was ruled accidental, but conspiracy theories swirled. Theories fed by her rumored ties to the Kennedys and the timing of her final days. She was the most desired woman in America, yet in the end, Marilyn Monroe died as she lived, adored by millions, but forsaken by the few who truly mattered. Johnny Cash, the man who walked the line and then crossed it. In 1956, Johnny Cash stood on stage in black from head to toe, singing promises of loyalty to a packed crowd. His voice, rough-edged and honest, carried the vow, "Because you're mine, I walk the line." But behind that pledge was a storm brewing, one that would test his faith, his marriage, and his soul. At home was Vivian Liberto, his first wife and the mother of his 4 daughters. She had stood by him through army service, the early years of struggle, and the rise to stardom. But fame, like fire, has a way of burning through what matters most. And in 1956, while touring with the Louisiana Hayride, Johnny met June Carter, a magnetic performer with a voice as haunting as his own, and a gaze that made the air feel heavier. Their connection was immediate, electric, dangerous. What started as chemistry on stage evolved into something deeper behind the curtain. Johnny, already wrestling with personal demons and the pressures of celebrity, found comfort in June's steadiness and temptation in her closeness. Rumors began to swirl. Tour bus conversations grew hushed, and Vivian, watching from the sidelines, felt the shift. Johnny's struggles off stage only added fuel to the collapse. He couldn't stay sober, and his absence, physical and emotional, grew more frequent. Vivian, weary from the weight of secrets and late-night phone calls, finally filed for divorce in 1966. The woman who once held his hand as he chased his dream now stepped away from the spotlight, and from him. But what came next was the twist no one expected. Johnny's bond with June didn't fade. It deepened. He proposed to her repeatedly over the years, only to be turned down until 1968, when he dropped to one knee in front of a live audience and asked her once again. This time, she said yes. Their marriage became legendary. 2 country icons, scarred and seasoned, choosing each other over and over again. They stayed together until their final days in 2003, passing away just months apart. He broke a vow. He broke a home. But somehow, Johnny Cash found a love that stitched his soul back together. One verse, one stage, one woman at a time. Ingrid Bergman, the love affair that brought down a star. In 1950, Ingrid Bergman was the face of purity, the luminous star of Casablanca, a foreign beauty who had captured America's heart. But one choice, one man, and one love affair would turn her from Hollywood's darling into its most controversial exile. While still married to her husband, Swedish doctor Petter Lindström, Ingrid traveled to Italy to film Stromboli with famed director Roberto Rossellini. What began as collaboration quickly became something more intimate. Their working hours stretched long into the night. Whispers began to travel from the volcanic island where they filmed back to the polished corridors of Hollywood. And then the truth broke like a storm. Ingrid was pregnant with Rossellini's child. The fallout was immediate and ferocious. Letters flooded into studios by the thousands. Angry, bitter, and betrayed. Fans who once saw her as the image of grace now turned their backs. But the backlash wasn't just from the public. A U.S. Senator, Edwin C. Johnson, publicly condemned her on the Senate floor, calling her a powerful influence for evil and proposing a bill to censor films based on the personal lives of their stars. Imagine that. One love affair nearly triggered morality laws for an entire industry. Hollywood, ever sensitive to scandal, dropped her like a bad investment. Her name vanished from marquees. Offers disappeared. In the span of a few months, Ingrid Bergman went from Oscar-winning icon to persona non grata. But she didn't hide. She stayed in Italy, married Rossellini, and gave birth to their son. Eventually, they would have 3 children, including Isabella Rossellini, who would become a star in her own right. The marriage, though passionate, was turbulent and brief. By 1957, it too had crumbled. Years later, the tide shifted again. Hollywood, with its short memory and hunger for redemption, welcomed Ingrid back. In 1956, she won her second Oscar for Anastasia, though she wasn't present to accept it. Still, the applause was real. The forgiveness, hard-won. She was exiled for following her heart, but Ingrid Bergman never apologized for it. In the end, the same fire that burned her also lit the path back to greatness. Humphrey Bogart, the affair that broke his vows and made him immortal. In 1944, on the humid, tension-filled set of To Have and Have Not, Hollywood's toughest leading man made a choice that would change the course of 3 lives forever, including his own. Humphrey Bogart was 44, already a giant of the silver screen, known for playing hardened men with soft, broken edges. At home, he was married to Mayo Method, an actress whose fiery temper earned them the nickname the Battling Bogarts. Their marriage was volatile, scarred by jealousy, shouting matches, and long, bitter silences. But Bogart had never left until Lauren Bacall walked in. She was just 19, green, elegant, with a voice like velvet and eyes that could melt steel. Their chemistry was undeniable, on screen and off. Between takes, they'd whisper in corners, laugh too long at each other's jokes, and disappear when no one was looking. The crew noticed. So did the press. And so did Mayo. The scandal was Hollywood catnip, the brooding icon, the ingenue, the wife left behind. Rumors swirled that director Howard Hawks, who had discovered Bacall, was furious, partly out of control, partly out of jealousy. He warned Bogart she would break his heart. He told Bacall she was risking her career, but neither one listened. By 1945, Bogart filed for divorce. The fallout was swift and personal. Friends were divided. Mayo's drinking worsened. Bacall's reputation took a hit. Whispers followed her from studio to studio, calling her a homewrecker before she'd even turned 21. But Bogart didn't flinch. He married Bacall just weeks after the ink dried on the divorce papers. And against all odds, their marriage endured. Through war, career highs, and private heartbreaks, they remained together until Bogart's death in 1957. In a town where love affairs flickered out as fast as flashbulbs, theirs became something rare and real. Still, the cost was undeniable. A broken marriage, a woman publicly humiliated, a young actress thrust into scandal before she'd had time to stand on her own. Bogart always played the man who'd seen too much, loved too hard, and trusted too late. In the end, life imitated art, and his greatest role might have been the one he fought hardest to keep behind closed doors. Cary Grant, the gentleman who rewrote the script and erased his wife. In 1957, Cary Grant stood on set. Crisp suit, trademark charm, the very image of old Hollywood sophistication. But behind that suave exterior was a betrayal as cold as the clapboard that ended the first take. Grant was 53 when he signed on to film Houseboat, a romantic comedy about an American widower and the spirited Italian woman who turns his life upside down. The script had been lovingly written by his wife, Betsy Drake, a thoughtful actress and writer who hoped the project might reignite both his career and their marriage. She was originally cast in the lead role alongside her husband, but what happened next would blindside her and rewrite everything. Enter Sophia Loren. At just 23, Loren was captivating, sultry, sharp, and already a rising star in Europe. When she and Cary worked together on The Pride and the Passion the year prior, rumors of a growing connection had already begun. By the time Houseboat began production, those whispers had turned into something real. Grant, determined to pursue Lauren, made a calculated move. He had the script revised, cutting Betsy Drake out of the film entirely and replacing her with Sophia. Betsy, who had poured her heart into the project, wasn't just fired. She was erased. The affair between Grant and Lauren blossomed under the spotlight, undeniable and electric. But it was also doomed. Sophia later revealed in interviews that she was torn, flattered by Grant's affection, but already committed to producer Carlo Ponti, the man she would eventually marry. Cary Grant's marriage to Betsy dissolved quietly. There were no dramatic headlines, no fiery confessions, just a slow fade into silence. His pursuit of Sophia ended too, but not before leaving behind a broken marriage, a discarded script, and a scandal tucked just beneath the studio polish. Years later, Sophia would call Grant one of the great loves of her life, but she never looked back. And Grant, for all his elegance, never quite explained the cost of rewriting a love story to suit his own desires. On screen, he was the man every woman wanted. But behind the scenes, Cary Grant made sure the leading lady was his to choose, no matter who got written out. Rita Hayworth, the love goddess who couldn't find love herself. In 1946, Rita Hayworth sizzled across the screen in Gilda, all hair flips and sly glances. The very embodiment of desire. Audiences were spellbound. Soldiers painted her face on bomber planes. She became known as the love goddess. But off-screen, the woman everyone wanted to love was quietly breaking under the weight of being wanted. Born Margarita Cancino, Rita had been shaped by men long before she knew how to shape herself. First by her father, who pushed her into dancing as a child. Then by studios, who dyed her hair red, raised her hairline with electrolysis, and trained her to move, speak, and smile like a fantasy. And then came the husbands. Rita married 5 times, and each time the story repeated itself. The men adored the image of her, but not the reality. Her most shocking union came in 1949, when she wed Prince Ali Khan, son of the Aga Khan, and one of the world's most eligible aristocrats. Hollywood gasped. It seemed, for a moment, like a fairy tale, the screen siren becoming a real-life princess. But the illusion shattered quickly. While pregnant with their daughter Yasmin, Rita discovered that Ali Khan was continuing to entertain other women, even as she waited alone in European palaces and hotel suites. The betrayal stung deeper than the tabloids revealed. She had left behind her career, her country, and even her religion to be with him, only to find herself sidelined in her own marriage. They divorced in 1953, and though she returned to Hollywood, something had changed. She was still luminous, still magnetic, but a quiet sadness began to follow her on screen and off. She once famously said, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." It was more than a quote. It was a quiet cry from a woman who had spent her life being worshipped, but never truly seen. By the 1970s, Rita's health declined as she battled early-onset Alzheimer's, long before the public understood the disease. The woman once adored by millions began to fade from memory, even as her films remained eternal. She gave the world glamour, allure, and fantasy, but in her own life, Rita Hayworth searched endlessly for a kind of love that never quite made it into the script. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the secret that lived under his roof. In 2011, the world learned that the Terminator had kept a secret, not in some distant past, not in the haze of stardom, but under his very own roof. For over a decade, Arnold Schwarzenegger had been hiding a betrayal so personal, so close to home, that it shattered the image he'd spent years crafting. He was Hollywood's action titan, a former Mr. Olympia turned box office juggernaut. Then he became governor of California, a man who had seemingly conquered every arena he entered. But behind the closed doors of his Brentwood mansion, the foundation of his carefully managed public life was already crumbling. The revelation came after Arnold left office. He sat down with his wife of 25 years, Maria Shriver, a Kennedy by blood, a journalist by trade, and confessed the unthinkable, that he had fathered a child with Mildred Baena, a longtime member of their household staff. The affair had occurred years earlier, yet the boy had grown up in plain view, his resemblance to Arnold becoming more undeniable by the day. The fallout was swift and deeply human. Maria moved out almost immediately. Divorce filings followed, and the media, always hungry for contradiction, tore into the story. How could a man so publicly devoted to family keep such a secret for so long? How could a marriage so revered unravel overnight? Arnold didn't deflect. He issued a public statement, accepting full responsibility, offering no excuses, and admitting he had caused enormous pain. But some wounds can't be repaired with words. The Schwarzenegger-Shriver household, once a symbol of stability in an unstable town, was split for good. And yet, from the ashes of scandal came something unexpected, a bond. Arnold slowly built a relationship with his son Joseph, who embraced his father's name and shared his love of fitness. They appeared together publicly. Joseph even joined Dancing with the Stars, carrying not just his father's genetics, but his spotlight. He was the man who could crush enemies on screen and charm governors off it. But when the curtain fell, Arnold Schwarzenegger was left to face something no role could prepare him for: the quiet wreckage of a lie that lived just down the hallway. Eddie Fisher, the crooner who left a love song half finished. In 1958, Eddie Fisher's voice was as smooth as silk and just as slippery. Millions tuned in to his variety show, watched him on stage, bought his records. To the public, he was the golden boy of post-war pop, clean-cut, devoted, a picture-perfect husband to America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds. But offstage, a love triangle was forming that would rock Hollywood to its core. It began in grief. Elizabeth Taylor, Debbie's close friend, had just lost her husband, producer Mike Todd, in a tragic plane crash. As she mourned, Eddie offered comfort, long phone calls, late-night visits, gentle reassurances. At first, it looked like friendship, but behind the curtain, lines blurred. Whispers turned to confirmation. Elizabeth and Eddie weren't just consoling each other, they were falling in love. Debbie sensed it before she knew it. At a dinner party, the air shifted. Guests whispered, eyes darted. And later, when she called Elizabeth's room looking for company, it wasn't Liz who answered. It was Eddie. The silence on the line said everything. The scandal was immediate and merciless. Eddie divorced Debbie in 1959 and married Elizabeth the same year. Headlines blared betrayal. Fans were outraged. Debbie, the girl next door, had been blindsided by not one, but two of the people closest to her. The fallout wasn't just emotional. Eddie's career took a nosedive. Sponsors pulled out. His television show was canceled. He had traded his clean image for one soaked in tabloid ink. And yet, the fairy tale with Elizabeth didn't last. Their marriage was passionate but chaotic, shadowed by public scrutiny, and Elizabeth's eventual affair with Richard Burton on the set of Cleopatra. Eddie, once again, was left behind. Years later, Debbie and Elizabeth would reconcile. Debbie even joked that they'd ended up on the same junk pile, but her forgiveness didn't erase the ache. It simply allowed her to move forward with grace. Eddie Fisher had a voice that could melt hearts, but in the end, he broke the wrong one. And the love song he tried to rewrite became a ballad of regret. Clark Gable, the king who hid a royal secret. In 1935, Clark Gable had the kind of smile that could stop traffic, and often did. Dubbed the King of Hollywood, he oozed masculinity, charm, and danger. But behind the confident swagger and box office hits was a secret so deeply buried It wouldn't come to light until decades later, long after the curtain had fallen. At the time, Gable was married, but not to Carol Lombard, the great love of his life. He was wed to Rhea Langham, a wealthy older woman who had helped shape his career. Yet, like many stars of the era, fidelity wasn't his strong suit. Gable's romances were whispered about from coast to coast, but one affair stood out not just for its heat, but for its consequences. During the filming of Call of the Wild in 1935, Gable reportedly had a brief but intense fling with his co-star, the luminous Loretta Young. She was Catholic, devout, and image-conscious, and when she discovered she was pregnant, panic set in. At that time, an unwed pregnancy could destroy a woman's career overnight, and so Loretta vanished from public view, returning months later with a newly adopted baby girl. That child, Judy Lewis, grew up believing she'd been adopted. Her ears had to be pinned back surgically, a subtle attempt to hide a physical trait she shared unmistakably with Gable. For years, it remained Hollywood's most carefully kept secret. Neither Loretta nor Gable ever publicly acknowledged the truth during their lifetimes. Privately, Loretta battled with the guilt and pressure. Gable, meanwhile, sent quiet support, financial help, occasional gifts, but never openly fathered the child. It was only decades later, after both had passed, that Judy would publicly confirm what everyone close to her already suspected. She was Clark Gable's daughter. Gable went on to marry Lombard in 1939, a marriage filled with love but tragically cut short by her death in a plane crash. He would marry again, but the quiet scandal of Judy Lewis remained a footnote, unspoken but ever present. He was the king of the silver screen, beloved by millions. Yet when it came to his own blood, Clark Gable remained a ghost, a father in the shadows, watching a truth he helped create grow up without his name. Jean Harlow, the blonde bombshell who couldn't escape the shadows. In 1932, Jean Harlow's hair was white-hot platinum, her laugh infectious, and her name on every marquee from coast to coast. She wasn't just Hollywood's first blonde bombshell. She was the reason the term existed. But behind the sparkle and satin gowns, Harlow's real life was a storm of scandal, loss, and secrets the studios worked overtime to hide. At just 21, Jean married MGM producer Paul Byrne, a powerful man more than twice her age. On paper, it seemed like a strategic match. But 2 months after the wedding, Byrne was found dead in their home, a gun by his side, and a note that only deepened the mystery. The official story? Suicide. But Hollywood didn't buy it, and neither did the press. Rumors swirled. Some said the marriage had never been consummated. Others whispered about a violent altercation or a past lover arriving unannounced. The note he left was cryptic, referring to past humiliations and apologizing to Joan. But Harlow, kept under tight studio control, never spoke publicly about what truly happened. MGM, fearing scandal, spun the story fast, burying details, paying off reporters, and shielding their rising star from further fallout. Jean threw herself back into work. Her films were hits, and audiences couldn't get enough of her. But privately, she battled grief, pressure, and the relentless expectations of being the fantasy woman of an entire generation. She leaned on her mother, a controlling figure who managed nearly every aspect of her life, and her third husband, cameraman Harold Rawson, in a marriage many suspected was arranged to quiet rumors. And then, just as quickly as she rose, she was gone. In 1937, while filming Saratoga, Jean collapsed on set. She was bloated, in pain, and barely able to speak. Doctors initially misdiagnosed her, and her health spiraled. In truth, she was suffering from kidney failure, a condition worsened by years of neglect and the harsh demands of Hollywood. She died days later at just 26 years old. Jean Harlow lit up the screen with laughter and flirtation, but off camera, she was surrounded by secrets, silenced by scandal, and gone long before her story could be told on her own terms. Lana Turner, the starlet, whose love life ended in bloodshed. In 1958, Lana Turner walked onto the Academy Awards red carpet, draped in white mink, diamonds glittering under the flashbulbs. But behind the glamour, she was carrying the weight of a secret so explosive it would soon dominate every front page in America. Known for her smoldering beauty and breathy voice, Lana had been a Hollywood staple since she was discovered sipping a soda at a malt shop. But beneath the soft curls and sultry rolls was a woman who had endured more than her fair share of heartbreak and had chosen more than her share of dangerous men. Her most volatile romance came in the form of Johnny Stompanato, a bodyguard with underworld ties and a jealous streak that spiraled into something darker. He wasn't just controlling, he was allegedly violent. Friends warned her, studios worried, but Lana, always searching for affection, stayed. It all came to a head one rainy April night in her Beverly Hills home. Lana had just returned from filming when an argument with Stompanato escalated. Shouting, threats, and the terrifying fear that this time things might go too far. What happened next shocked even a scandal-hardened Hollywood. From the hallway, Lana's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, heard the fight. Fearing for her mother's life, she burst into the bedroom with a kitchen knife in her hand. Moments later, Stompanato was dead on the floor. The trial that followed was part courtroom, part circus. Cheryl, visibly shaken, testified that she had acted to protect her mother. The press painted Lana as both victim and vixen, the glamorous starlet who had invited danger too close, then watched it destroy her home. Ultimately, the killing was ruled justifiable homicide, and Cheryl was not charged. Still, the public's judgment lingered. Lana's career slowed. The studios, once eager to cast her, grew wary. And though she continued to work, even earning an Oscar nomination, the whisper